Another early start saw me once again on the water at 5 a.m. This time the sun was behind me as I continued west down the English Channel. My first target was Dover Harbour, and within 2 hours I started to edge past the famous white cliffs for my first sight of the busy port. Heading towards the harbour, I realised there was a pattern to the ferries. There were two inbound vessels, followed quickly by two outgoing ferries. After this there was a gap of about 30 minutes with little activity. So to avoid hanging around at the port entrance, I wanted to time my arrival just as the second ferry exited the harbour. I could see the second inbound ferry heading towards the harbour, and probably more by luck than actual judgment, I arrived just as the second outbound ferry departed the port. My next job was to coordinate with harbour control, asking permission to cross both harbour entrances. Dover VTS could not have been more helpful. When I arrived at the eastern side of the harbour, I contacted them via radio, and they safely guided me across the first of the entrances. Once on the south side of the harbour, the water became choppy due to the waves bouncing back from the harbour wall. This carried on for about 20 minutes before I reached the western entrance. Here you could see a significant drop in the swell as the sea passed unhindered into the port. A final call to Dover VTS, confirming I was clear of the harbour mouth, and I was on my way to Sambar Ho. Dover VTS, this is Kayaking. I am now clear of the western entrance. Over.
Kayaking, Dover VTS. That's all received. Thanks for the calls. Safe kayak to your destination.
VTS, thank you for all your help. Over. I stopped for a short break at Sambar Ho, a new spit of land created by the waste removed during the excavation of the Channel Tunnel in the 1980s. I'd paddled from Bexhill and headed east. This was one of my chosen campsites, so I was interested to see how feasible this was. Looking around, it seemed to be an ideal spot, so long as I was discreet. My next destination was Folkestone Harbour, where again I decided to change plan. Rather than hugging the coast, I took the direct line to Dungeness. This put me quite a way offshore. However, the conditions couldn't have been better. With the tidal flow behind me, it still took me nearly 4 hours to reach Dungeness. But combined with cutting across the Goodwin Sands yesterday, I shaved a whole day off the trip. I left Dungeness at 2 p.m. and expected a short 3-hour paddle to my evening stop at Winchelsea Beach. Regrettably, this didn't happen. As I passed a long line of fishermen on the western bank of the spit, I realised the waste tube of my spray deck had split. This meant every wave that hit me poured directly into the cockpit. So with a last view of Dungeness Power Station, I stopped filming and spent the next 5 hours doing short paddles and pumping the boat out. I finally arrived at Winchelsea Beach, close to 7 p.m. For the first time on this trip I was cold and tired. The first thing I had to do once I was landed was fill up my homemade sandbags with stones and set up my tent. Luckily I was joined by my friend Mark, and while I was busy setting up the tent, he started to prepare the evening meal, as well as bringing a couple of beers along. Knowing this section of the trip would only take about 6 hours, we had a lazy start to the day, setting off at 7. As the third member of last year's Cross England paddle, Alan, joined us for the last leg of the journey. It was great to have the guys with me as we passed under the cliffs at Fairlight, before arriving at the pretty seaside town of Hastings. Even now, with its depleted number of boats, the town still has the largest land-based fishing fleet in Europe, and we stopped to watch one of the fleet being winched up the beach. Three hours into the paddle, we stopped for a coffee break at St Leonard's. The tide was continuing to ebb, so we didn't have to carry them too far. Launching again, there was even less wind and no waves, but the haze in the air still remained. An hour later, I'd said goodbye to Mark and Alan and continued on for the last 2 hours of the trip. Rounding the small cliffs of Gary Hill, I slid past the Edwardian seafront of Bexhill. Having left Gravesend 3.5 days ago and paddled 190 kilometres, I finally reached the Delaware Pavilion, which marked the finishing line for this adventure.